Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are unpacking one of the absolute most dramatic shifts we've seen in modern financial history. We're talking about the breathtaking sale of Schroders. This is a towering 222-year-old British financial behemoth, and it just got swallowed up by an American giant. And this isn't just your standard corporate merger. It's this profound, almost cinematic tale about family legacy, the brutal, unforgiving math of modern finance, and a massive seismic shift in global wealth moving straight across the Atlantic. Section 1, a shocking secret meeting. All right, picture this scene. It's January 2026. Richard Oldfield, who has been the CEO of Schroders for barely 14 months at this point, is sitting in a hotel room in Beijing. But he isn't just prepping for some standard executive check-in. This is where it gets crazy. He's literally sweeping his room for spying devices. He's actually traveling as part of a business delegation with the British Prime Minister, but right in this moment, his only focus is securing his internet connection. He's about to initiate a highly confidential video call with the founding family of the firm, and I mean absolute secrecy is paramount here. So the family is assembled back in London at the offices of a top-tier law firm to take Oldfield's secure call. And they were entirely unprepared for what he was about to say. He drops this on them, a staggering £9.9 billion buyout offer from Nuveen, which is this massive asset manager based over in Chicago. Family members later said they were confronted with a question they absolutely, positively were not expecting. I mean, talk about a complete shock to a family whose entire identity was deeply intertwined with this firm. Section 2, the Schroder family dynasty. Let's move to and see how this builds, because the roots of Schroders go way, way back to 1804. That's when a Hanseatic German named Johann Heinrich Schroder started financing cotton and sugar shipments in London. Starting out as a 19th century merchant bank, its history became completely entwined with the British economy. They were literally underwriting the country's global trade. They successfully listed on the London Stock Exchange in 1959. And even when they made the really tough, emotionally heart-rending decision to sell off their investment banking arm to a U.S. firm back in 2000, they proudly retained and grew their global asset management powerhouse. They even survived the 2008 financial crisis, largely thanks to the long-term stewardship of the family. Now, the defining figure of the firm's modern era was the family patriarch Bruno Schroder. Bruno sat on the company's board for almost 6 decades. And guys, he wasn't just some figurehead. He was this legendary, fiercely independent character. He incredibly flew his own airplane, not just up to his Scottish estate, but he'd actually fly it to visit the firm's branches worldwide. He was the unquestioned voice of the clan, and as one industry veteran noted, Bruno was absolutely adamant that there would never be a sale of the family silver. He fiercely, fiercely protected the firm's sovereignty right up until his passing in 2019. But, well, his death completely changed the internal gravity of the firm. Look at Bruno's old world philosophy on the left. He was an anchor, a coherent, single voice representing the family's daily interests and just flat out refusing to sell. But then, look at the fractured reality on the right. Bruno's daughter, Leonie, took his place on the board alongside another family member. The family's interests had basically become fractured across 3 generations, with some members far less rooted in the daily operations of the business than Bruno had been. Without that single, unyielding voice, it took the broader family, who held a 42% stake, mind you, just 3 meetings over roughly 6 weeks to agree to the Nuveen offer. And no, they aren't retaining a stake. They're cashing out entirely. Section 3, the race for scale. So you've got to wonder, why did a family that held on for over 2 centuries suddenly agree to sell the family's silver in just 6 weeks? Well, the answer lies in the brutal math of modern finance. In the 3 years prior to Richard Oldfield taking the helm in 2024, Schroders was bleeding. Its stock had plummeted by roughly 50%. Customers were systematically pulling billions of pounds out of their traditional stock picker-led funds. And hey, if you have a pension or an investment account, you might even be caught up in this shift yourself. The old world of making money simply by actively picking equities was rapidly coming to an end. So, the crucial point is its impossible threefold problem that is currently strangling European asset managers. Step 1. Investors globally have moved toward lower-cost passive index trackers. Because the fees on those are so incredibly low, you need a massive scale of assets just to turn a profit. Step 2. To try and make higher margins, firms are pivoting to private markets, but bolting on private market firms is incredibly costly and requires highly specialized expertise. Step 3. Accessing the deep, deep pools of capital needed to fund those acquisitions is heavily dependent on cracking the U.S. market, and frankly, that was something Schroders just didn't have the money to do without heavily diluting the family's stake. It's like CEO Richard Oldfield plainly stated, margins are under immense pressure right now. The board had given him a strict mandate to cut costs, but the underlying unavoidable reality was that Schroders simply lacked the immense scale required to actually compete in a low-fee passive index world. You can't just cut your way to growth, right? They needed massive, transformative scale.
Section 4. The $2 Trillion Club.
Welcome to the $2 trillion club. Bankers increasingly view this as the absolute minimum threshold of assets under management required to absorb the incredibly high costs of doing business today and, still turn a decent profit for shareholders. To survive the modern squeeze, institutions desperately need to hit this $2 trillion mark. It was a feat Schroders quickly realized it just couldn't achieve alone or through smaller domestic acquisitions.
And this brilliantly illustrates the uphill battle they were facing. Take a look at these assets under management. Schroders, despite all its legacy and a really strong market share in the UK and Europe, managed about $1 trillion, which sounds like a lot. Nuveen sits at $1.4 trillion. But look at the early adopters of index trackers in the US. Vanguard is overseeing about $12 trillion, and BlackRock boasts nearly $14 trillion.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when you actually chart a historic British heavyweight like Schroders against the tech-powered megafunds of the US, the visual gap is just staggering. Schroders is incredibly dwarfed. They didn't offer the hyper-specialized niche of a boutique firm, but they also completely lacked the sheer overwhelming scale of their American rivals. They were stuck right in the middle. But by making the agonizing decision to sell to Nuveen, the math finally works out. By combining forces, the new entity commands $2.5 trillion under management. They blast right past that survival threshold and firmly cement themselves into the top 10 globally. The Schroders brand survives, and London remains the international headquarters. But the independence, that's gone for good. Section 5, London losing to America. If we zoom out from the family dynamics and the corporate math for a second, this sale is the ultimate symbol of a much broader and, frankly, alarming global economic shift. The systemic issues draining the UK market make it nearly impossible for domestic firms to compete with the deep capital pools of Wall Street. And it's not just Schroders. Listed UK firms like Aberdeen Group and M&G are grappling with the exact same struggles, slashing costs, pivoting to private assets, and desperately trying to build scale as customers pull out their money. And it's all compounded by British pension schemes, which were once the lifeblood for firms like Schroders, pulling their money away from UK equities for the last 2 decades. It's this vicious cycle, weighing down the entire London Stock Exchange, which is facing a relative decline compared to the booming markets in the US. The geopolitical reality here is stark. According to a recent report by the Brussels-based think tank Bruegel, we have officially reached a tipping point. Nearly half, 50%, of all European assets are now run by American firms. The gravitational pull of the United States in the financial sector is just becoming absolute. This represents a massive emotional and economic blow to the City of London. As corporate finance banker Robert Colthorpe observed, London risks becoming a mere hub of the U.S. market rather than a leader in its own right. Losing a preeminent listed investment business with a profile that literally transcended generations to overseas ownership, that is a very bitter pill for British finance to swallow. Which brings us to the question currently echoing through the boardrooms of every independent financial firm left in Europe. Other deals are already in the works, and you better believe competitors are taking very close note of the nearly £10 billion netted by Schroders shareholders. It leaves us with a really provocative and unsettling thought. If a 222-year-old dynasty with centuries of survival instincts couldn't make it work independently in today's market, then who can? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the markets because this trend is far, far from over.